As I already told you that an EC2 instance is a virtual server. Now, when we think about server, there are a lot of other things that come into picture. For example, the operating system of the server. Because to install an application, you would need an operating system. Because operating system runs those applications. Then we need the amount of CPU and RAM also. So, what would be the size of the server? The storage of the server, etc., etc. So all these things are there in EC2 also, and these are the EC2 components that I was talking about. First, as I said, the operating system. So now when you launch an EC2 instance or when you launch a virtual server in AWS, you get an option to provide the operating system that you want AWS to install in the server. We do not have to install any operating system. What we do is that we just mention that this is the operating system that we need, and while launching the EC2 instance, AWS would automatically install the operating system inside of it. And that component is called AMI or Amazon Machine Image. So when we create an EC2 instance, the first thing that we have to mention is the AMI. And AMI is a group of operating systems. So let's say one AMI would contain Amazon Linux, another AMI would contain Red Hat Linux, another AMI might contain Windows operating system. So you choose the AMI which suits your need. So it contains the image of the operating system when we launch the EC2 instance. What AWS would do, it would install the operating system by downloading the OS image from the AMI. Then we have the size of the resource, basically the size of the EC2 instance. So when you talk about size, there are two things. One is the amount of CPUs, the number of CPUs, and the other one is the amount of RAM. So how many CPUs do you want in the virtual server? In this case, how many CPUs do you want in the EC2 instance? So the CPU and RAM, and the combination of this can be provided using something called instance family and instance type. So instance family talks about the generation of CPU and RAM that you are providing, and instance type provides the size of the CPU and RAM, meaning let's say you want 4 CPUs, you want 13 GB or 16 GB of RAM, or you want let's say 16 CPUs and let's say 64 GB of RAM. Now when you talk about CPU, AWS uses something called vCPU or virtual CPU. So virtual CPU is nothing but a thread in a core. So AWS uses CPU cores with multi-threaded enabled. So all the cores can have 2 threads at max. So a single vCPU is a single thread. 2 vCPUs combined together will give you 1 CPU core. Then we have the storage to install the operating system and any other software also. So imagine that you have a laptop, it can be Windows laptop or Mac laptop or Ubuntu or Unix, whatever. So what you do is that typically the operating system and all the other softwares are installed in a separate directory, and the data is stored in a separate directory. For example, if I take Windows operating system for our example, then C drive would typically contain the operating system and all the softwares that we install, all the applications that we install in that particular laptop, and maybe D and E drive would contain the data. Similarly, we have two types of storages here. One is the storage to install the operating system and install other softwares that we install in the EC2 instance, and that is stored in EBS, and it is called root volume. So why root volume? Because this is where the operating system and all the other softwares would be installed. So the name is root volume, and it is backed by EBS, which is outside of the EC2 instance, and the EBS volume is attached to the EC2 instance. Then we have storage for data, which is separate than the operating system and software, as I mentioned earlier. That is also backed by EBS. So you can attach EBS volumes to store data there. The EBS volumes can be attached to the EC2 instance, and we can attach multiple EBS volumes to the same EC2 instance. Then we put the EC2 instance behind a network, and network is basically implemented by something called VPC or Virtual Private Cloud. We'll talk about VPC in Appendix 2. Then we have instance store or temporary storage. Now this is the storage which is attached to the EC2 instance. This does not persist data, and that's why it is called a temporary storage. And finally, server login credentials, so which are used to log into the EC2 instance. And what we do in EC2 is we use key pair to do the login. Login credentials are provided by key pair. So let's have a hands-on. What will we do is that I will launch an EC2 instance. We'll use an Amazon Linux OS with 2 vCPUs and 6 GB of RAM. We'll see whether this is available or not. Then we'll use 10 GB for operating system and software. So basically the root volume would be 10 GB and 15 GB to store data. And we'll find a way to SSH into the EC2 instance. After SSHing or after logging into the EC2 instance remotely, we'll install MySQL and we will install AWS CLI. Then what we'll do is that after installing these softwares, we'll create an AMI and we'll launch another instance from the AMI. Then we'll see what is the difference of a custom AMI and the AMI which is provided to us. Then we'll stop and start the instance. I'll show you how to stop an instance. So if you stop an instance, there won't be any charge as such. And then the IP addresses, we'll just glance through the IP address because we'll talk about IP address in VPC again. So this is my EC2 dashboard. As I had already shown you that you can click or type EC2 here, and then if you press on star, it will come in the favorites button, and then go to instances, and then we'll launch an instance. I already have one EC2 instance launched, so let me go ahead and launch another instance. Click on launch instances, and then we have these options. The first one is the name of the instance, and I'm naming it as 3IAM Appendix A1 EC2 instance. Then after that, we have this application and OS images, which basically is the Amazon machine image or AMI. And if you see here, we have multiple options available. These are the operating systems like Amazon Linux, Mac OS, Ubuntu, Windows, Red Hat, SLES, which is SUSE. And then you have other operating systems also like Red Hat, Ubuntu, Microsoft Windows, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of AMIs available. These are the AMIs which are given to us by AWS, and we can create our own AMIs also. So we'll select Amazon Linux and then click here, and we'll select Amazon Linux 2, and this is free tier eligible. So if your account is new, you can use this as free tier. So I'll also use Amazon Linux 2. Amazon Linux 2 is based on CentOS Linux, and this is a Linux machine. Then we have instance type. So if you scroll down, we have this instance type. So instance type is basically the instance family and the size of the instance. So if you see here, it has selected T2.micro, family is T2, we have 1 vCPU and 1 GB of RAM. And if I click here, obviously you have a lot of other options. So we have T3, which is a general purpose EC2 instance. Then we have C5, which is compute optimized or CPU optimized EC2 instance. Also you have storage optimized EC2 instances like i4i. Then you have memory optimized EC2 instances. So these memory optimized, storage optimized, compute optimized, these are called instance family. And then micro, 8x large, 16x large, these are all the size of the instance. So if you see T2.nano has 1 vCPU and 0.5 GB of RAM, T2.micro has 1 vCPU and 1 GB of RAM. So again, if you scroll down, let's say T2.large, here we have 2 vCPU and 8 GB of RAM. So now what will I do is that we'll select the T2.micro because it is free tier eligible, and you can go ahead and select this also. Then we have key pair. Now what is a key pair? Why it is called a key pair? Because AWS provides us a pair of key. One is the public key and the other one is the private key. Public key would be there in the EC2 instance itself, and the private key would be downloaded by us and will be kept by us. We'll keep the private key. And then when you log in, we'll provide the private key, and that private key will do the authentication on EC2 instance. We do not have to provide any password as such. And now when you log in, all the communication from my laptop or from your laptop to the EC2 instance would be encrypted. So I'll create a key pair here and I will name it as 3-IAM Appendix A1 EC2 key pair. And there are two options, RSA and ED25519. Select RSA. And there are two formats, one is PIM and the other one is PPK. PIM is for OpenSSH. So if you have Unix based machine, then you'll be using or downloading the PIM file. If you are using Windows machine, then you'll have to download the PPK file, which can be used with PuTTY. Mine is a Unix based machine, so I'll download the PIM file. Click on create key pair, and what it will do is that, so it will download this PIM file in my laptop. Okay, so this is the key pair option. One option I forgot to mention is, if you see the username is EC2 user. This is the default user that is created for us by EC2. Of course, we can change user, we can create new users, but I'll not go into the details of that. That is something which the administrators should do, the cloud administrators or Unix administrators. So key pair is done, then we have network settings. We'll skip the network settings for now. We'll come back to network settings when we cover VPC. But remember one thing, we'll have to create the security group. As of now, just follow along. Click on create security group and then mention allow SSH traffic from anywhere, and the name would be launch wizard 2, and it will create a security group with launch user 2. Again, we'll cover a security group in the VPC section. And then configure storage. Now here things would be a little different, because in the requirement what we mentioned is that the root volume should be 10 GB so that we can install our operating system and multiple other softwares. So this is the root volume, if you see, and I'll select GP3. Always select GP3 because it is cheaper than GP2 and also more performant than GP2. So I'll select GP3 and the storage would be 10 GB, and I can add more volume also. So this is the additional volume that I want to add, which is actually an EBS volume, and the storage size would be 50 GB. That's what the requirement says. So when I launch this EC2 instance, I'll have a root volume on EBS. The operating system and all the softwares that we install would be actually installed in the root volume. Then I'll have a data volume of size 50 GB. I'll show you these two again in the EC2 instance. Then there are some advanced details. You can completely skip the advanced details and then click on launch instance. So the launch initiation has been started. We can go back to the instances console, and if you refresh it rather, then we'll see one more EC2 instance is getting launched. So the status is still running, but do not try to log into it yet because it's doing some initialization. Once the initialization is done, then you can log into the EC2 instance. Now the question is, how do you log in? What are the commands to do so? We do not need any additional command. You can click on this and then you have this connect option here. So if you click on this connect option, it will show you how you can connect to the EC2 instance. So as I have a Unix based machine, that's why it is telling me to open an SSH client. I'll have to locate the private key file which we had downloaded. The name of the key file is 3-IAM Appendix A1 EC2 key pair.pem. And once I locate this file, I'll have to change the permission of this file using this particular command. And then I can connect to the EC2 instance using this private IP. Now why it is private IP? Why there is no public IP? The reason is that while launching the EC2 instance, I did not mention the option to launch using public IP. So what will I do is that I'll terminate this and launch a new one. I can associate an elastic IP with it, but that will be chargeable. So let me show you how do you launch an EC2 instance with a public IP address. So the problem what happened was that I had deleted the default VPC. So that's why I had to launch this VPC in data engineering on AWS VPC, which was created by me. But if you have not deleted the default VPC, you can just launch the way I have shown you. That should work. Now what I have to do here is that I'll be creating something called an elastic IP, which is nothing but an IP, and I'll allocate this IP, and so allocate elastic IP, and it would be US East 1 region, and then allocated, and then I'll associate this elastic IP by clicking on action and associate elastic IP address with the EC2 instance 3IAM appendix A1 EC2 instance, and associate the IP address with it. Now if I go back and refresh the page, click on the EC2 instance, and I can see the public IP address here. So in your case, if you launch it in the default VPC, then you will get this public IP address automatically. Now, as you can see the status check, both the checks have been passed. Now I can actually log into this EC2 instance. And this is the EC2 key pair that I have just created. What I have to do is that I have located the EC2 key pair. Then you already know what commands to run. But if you have forgotten, you can go to the EC2 console, click on the EC2 instance, and then click on connect. And this is the command that you have to run, chmod 400 followed by the name of the key pair. Now what this command is doing, this is changing the permission of the key pair. So if you see, earlier this is the key pair file. Earlier the permission was a little different, and now it is a little different. If you do not know Unix commands and how to see Unix based permissions, that's perfectly fine. You just execute the command and that's all. But if you are in Windows, you don't even have to execute these commands. So the permission has been changed. Now I can SSH using this particular command, which is being shown here. So click on this, copy on that, and then run this command and then type yes. So now I am inside of the EC2 instance from my personal laptop. So what I have done, I have successfully launched a virtual server. The operating system was installed automatically by AWS because the operating system that I had mentioned was Amazon Linux 2. And if I type uname -a, it will tell me the version of the operating system. It is Linux, actually it is Amazon Linux, and a few other things like the instruction set, etc. So the virtual server has been launched, or the EC2 instance has been launched, and the operating system has automatically been installed in the EC2 instance by EC2 service itself. And then I have SSH'd into the EC2 instance also. And now before going further, I want to show you the data volume and the root volumes. So the command is lsblk. Now if you see, I have two devices attached to it. The first one is xvda and the other one is xvdb. So the xvda is the root volume of size 10 GB and xvdb is the data volume of size 50 GB. Now what I have to do is that I'll have to format this disk with the file system that we need, which will do it later on in the EBS session. So the EC2 instance was launched with Amazon Linux operating system. It has a root volume of size 10 GB and it has a data volume of size 50 GB. The data volume is not yet formatted. We'll format it later on. Now before going further, what I want to do is that let me show you the installation of two softwares. I'll install MySQL. So sudo yum install y, this is the command to install MySQL in Amazon Linux, and as you can see, MySQL has been installed. So if I type MySQL -- version, it is showing me that version 15.1 has been installed with the distribution MariaDB. Now let us go ahead and install the AWS command line also. So the first command that we have to run is this one, curl followed by the page, and don't worry about it. The commands would be there in the command sheet. It is done. And if I do ls lhrt, you will see that AWS CLI v2.zip has been downloaded. I'll have to unzip it obviously. Oops, sorry. So unzip the file AWS CLI.v2 and the file has been unzipped, and then we'll have to run the sudo./AWS install. Now if I run AWS -- version, it is showing me that AWS CLI has been installed. So we did not have anything in the operating system, but now we installed MySQL software and AWS CLI also. Now before Going into the next step, I want to show you the public key also, where the public key is actually stored. So just type cd and then type ls-la, and you will see a file name .ssh. I am inside of .ssh, type ls-la, then you'll see this authorized keys, and this is the public key. And if you see, the name of the key is also 3IAM appendix EC2 key pair. So this is the public key portion of the SSH file, and the private key portion is there in my machine, which I had downloaded. When I try to SSH into the EC2 instance, what it does is that it goes ahead and actually does a private key and public key matching, and then allows me to log in. Now if I remove this, I'll not be able to log in. If I remove this file, I'll not be able to log in to the EC2 instance. Don't ever do that. So both the softwares have been installed. Now let us go ahead and explore a little bit more details in the EC2 console.